Hi, Pastor Mike here with a devotional for Good Friday. Back during the Great Depression, there was a man by the name of John Griffith. He was a controller at the Great Railroad Drawbridge across the Mississippi River. One day, in the summer of 1937, he decided to take his 8-year-old son, Greg, with him to work. At noon, John Griffith put the bridge up to allow ships to pass, and he sat on the observation deck with his son to eat lunch. Time passed quickly. Suddenly, he was startled by the shriek of a train whistle in the distance. He quickly looked at his watch and noticed that it was 1:07 in the afternoon. The Memphis Express, with 400 passengers on board, was roaring toward the raised bridge. He leaped from the observation deck and ran back to the control tower. Just before throwing the master lever, he glanced down for any ships below. There, a sight caught his eye that caused his heart to leap poundingly into his throat. Greg had slipped from the observation deck and had fallen into the massive gears that operate the bridge. His left leg was caught in the cogs of the two main gears. Desperately, John's mind whirled to devise a rescue plan, but as soon as he thought of a possibility, he knew there was no way that it could be done. Again, with alarming closeness, the train whistle shrieked in the air. He could hear the clicking of the locomotive wheels over the tracks. That was his son down there. And yet there were 400 passengers on that train. John knew what he had to do. So he buried his head in his left arm and pushed the master switch forward. The great, massive bridge lowered into place just as the Memphis Express began to roar across the river. When John Griffith lifted his head with his face smeared with tears, he looked into the passing windows of the train. There were businessmen casually reading their afternoon papers, finely dressed ladies in the dining car sipping coffee, and children pushing long spoons into their dishes of ice cream. No one looked at the control house. No one looked at the great gearbox. With wrenching agony, John Griffith cried out at the steel train, "I sacrificed my son for you, people. Don't you care?" The train rushed by, but nobody heard the father's words, which recalled Lamentations 1:12. "Is it nothing to you, all who pass by?" Is the death of Christ, his sacrifice on the cross, nothing to you? Perhaps you're watching this and you're not a believer, and you haven't yet come to grips with an understanding of exactly what the cross means. The scripture says in Romans chapter 5, verse 8, it says, "But God demonstrates his own love toward us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us." While we were yet sinners. You know, some people think they're too bad to come to God. Some people think God could not possibly accept them. But this passage says, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. That's the way God demonstrates his love. He pours out his wrath upon his Son so that all who would trust him by faith come to him recognizing that they're sinners, asking him for forgiveness, would receive eternal and everlasting life with him, to be right with God. That's what Good Friday is all about. That's why Jesus died on the cross, That was his purpose. Look at the cross. Look at the blood and tears and sweat running down our Redeemer's face. Look at the blood running down his arms, from his feet. Look at the crown of thorns. Does this mean nothing to you? If you're a believer, pause right now and consider the wounds of your Redeemer. Don't let this day pass by without considering what Christ has done. If you're a believer, take time today to worship Him with gratitude and thanksgiving for what He's done for you. If you're not a believer, the scripture says, Jesus said this, He said, "And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men to me." If you feel inclined to come to Christ, if you feel Him drawing you, don't fight that feeling. Come to Christ today by faith, trusting Him. God bless you, and have a blessed Good Friday.